Hello and welcome to Round Robin. I'm your host, Robin McCormick with the City of Hampton's Communications and Marketing Department. And today we're going to delve into a topic that we did once before, but with a little more detail. And everyone can benefit from this. And it's how do you talk about money and money values with your partner or spouse? My guest is Alvean Lyons. Thank you.
Hi, good morning.
Thank you for coming back.
Indeed. I love it.
I think this is something that couples fight about even more than chores, if that's possible. I mean, those are like the top two things that they're hot button issues.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, it's also one of the things that you hear most in divorce court. Money.
Yes.
Fighting about money. What do I feel about money? What do you feel about money? And now that we're a partnership, what do we feel about money? But to suggest that either one of us can have completely different views about that, operate with it completely differently in the relationship and it still be successful is really disingenuous.
You have to figure out, you have to make some compromises or agreements or something, even if you have radically different perspectives.
Right. Where's the common ground going to be? Oh, no question about it. And it's challenging. And we have to recognize that it's going to be challenging because how we experience money growing up, and when we did our segment last time on our personal perspectives about money, we're going to bring that into the relationship.
Right.
So it really is, we really have to know how we feel about it before we get into the conversations about how our partners are going to feel about that as well. So yes, I'm with you 100% on that.
And I think it's doubly hard if you come from two very different backgrounds.
Because those different backgrounds are going to add to different value systems. And value systems are really at the core of who we are as individuals. What we believe drives us. So if we can't examine where we are in the process and what our personal beliefs are, and then begin to move into a conversation about that with someone else and recognize that we're not going to have the same perspective. We're really not, just by virtue of the fact that we are two very different human beings having this conversation. And can we have this conversation, disagree on some things, and still be okay with that? And then find some common ground in the process. But it is so important that we do have the conversation about it because you can't avoid it in a relationship. You can't build a relationship without it where you're sharing a home and you're raising children together and you're paying bills or not, whatever that may be. You can't avoid having that discussion at some point.
It's hard. I'm not that good at it. So give me some tips. Let's start.
Okay. All right. So, I like to make it very easy.
Yes.
Because we're busy and we forget lots of things because we're inundated with information. So when we think about money, there's a 4-letter word most of us think about. That C word. Can you think of what it is off the top of your head?
Cash.
Very good. You're so brilliant. This is why I picked you.
A 4-letter word. Okay.
Exactly. So let's use cash as an acronym. Okay. So C being communicate. We have to communicate about this. We have to set aside some time to be able to have this discussion. For my husband and I, for instance, we have our money meeting. That's what we call it.
Money meeting?
Our money meeting. And we pick a day, and because we both get paid monthly, we pick a day at the end of the month where we sit down and we say, what do we need to pay for? What has to be done? What's on the list of needs versus what's on the list of wants.
But see, now you're assuming there is a list of needs and wants, that you've gotten that far, which is really farther than some people.
But we do know that it does exist for us on the inside.
Yes.
It's just moving what it is on the inside to the outside in conversation.
Okay.
So I'm not assuming that people
you have your own list of needs and wants that may not be the same as his.
That we may not have talked about. But we need to have a conversation about that because how money is going to be spent is going to be based on those things.
Right.
So it's important that I know what you think is very important to you and how you think the money should be spent once we've paid the necessary bills with what's left over. If there is something left over, what are we doing with that? We need to have a discussion about that because if you're operating and swiping your card at Target and I'm swiping mine at Walmart, we have to have a conversation about how many times this is getting swiped and what we're doing with it.
Right.
So, and I say that just because there are two local examples that we see half of Hampton in on a regular basis. So that's very important. So we've got to communicate about that.
And that's unusual because I bet you in most couples, you have one person who pays the bills and it isn't a discussion very often.
Yeah, which is why it often turns into a fight.
Because the person who pays the bills sees that conflict, and the other
Absolutely.
person isn't necessarily as involved in
the process. And then the sense that often happens is that you don't value what's important. But it's not that I don't value what's important, it's that we haven't mutually agreed on what is.
Right,
You don't even
right.
know what I really care about or how I want to see the money spent. And I don't know what our real expenses are, so I may be a little insensitive
Yes, yes.
to what needs to be done. But for me to assume that either of us know the other person's perspective is a really, really dangerous position to be in, and often leads to conflict. And we want to avoid unnecessary conflict. There are things that we're not going to see the same, but there are things that we can avoid fighting about by virtue of communicating about
and
them.
that scheduled meeting and that scheduled communication is better than dealing with it when tensions are high over something.
Absolutely, because timing makes a difference.
It does.
There are times that we are more apt to have a really comfortable conversation about difficult things than other times. If I'm in the midst of my spending and now you want to tell me that I can't or I shouldn't or whatever it may be, the emotions are a lot higher then. So us being reasonable and thoughtful about each other's positions is a little more difficult if we wait until we're in the moment to have
Gotcha.
that discussion.
Okay.
So I always say the important thing to do is you've got to communicate about it. And as partners, it is essential because you can't even move to what it is that you need to talk about with your kids if you haven't even agreed where you stand as partners. The next thing is ask. Ask yourself the question, is it a want or is it a need? You heard me mention that lightly before, but it's very important for us to establish those things. What is the difference? And what do we each think qualifies in each category? But we cannot assume the other person's position. So I say assume over and over again because a lot of times in relationships, we think we know where the other person is.
Yes.
And we could be so wrong about it. So you've got to ask the question. So in the communication first, and then asking the question about the wants versus the need. The third thing is the S, save. Even if it's a small amount, you've got to get in the habit of saving. Saving is a habit. It's a way of doing things. Like exercise is a habit. It's not one we all enjoy. I try to avoid it as much as possible.
Me too.
But saving is a habit also. We enjoy it afterwards. And it's just like exercise because it's
Yeah.
one of those things you have to be disciplined about. You have to set aside the time and the commitment to be able to do it. But you're always pleased with the results after the fact. And they don't happen immediately. Saving is the same way. It's not going to happen. You're not going to see yourself become rich overnight. You're not even going to see yourself become comfortable overnight. But if you consistently do it over time, you will see that you have accomplished something that you can be proud of. And then you determine how you want to use what you've saved. Is it about the education? Is it about the new home? Is it about the new opportunity? What do you want to do with it? Which still leads us back to the asking and the communicating component.
Right. But that also gets to those. It is easier to save if you know what you're saving for.
Absolutely.
And maybe it's going into different pots. I mean, I think as hard as it is when you're a young couple, saving for retirement, which sounds way long
yes.
off, but the earlier you do it,
The better
it is. And the same thing with college savings. But maybe it's a vacation or a car, or it's a little easier to live without things in the moment if you know what that plan is.
Absolutely. And that's so well said, because that setting goals, knowing what our common goals are, it makes us feel better when we can say, okay, I'm not doing this, or I cannot purchase this right now because I'm going to be able to do this later,
Right.
which happens during those communications, those conversations when we get together and we talk about where we are, what we want to do, what we may need to do to be able to get to where we want to be. All of that takes place in that communication. So you're 100% right. If we have common goals, it makes our common sacrifices easier.
Yes. If I'm saving because you're making me, that's not as good.
No.
That's much
That's
harder
not as
than
much
if
fun.
I care about what I'm saving for and I understand and we've talked about
Right,
it.
and we're
I'm
in
invested.
this together. Because that
Yes.
invested thing is absolutely right. If we're mutually invested, then we're both feeling this
Right,
similarly about the experience.
Sure,
because
and
you've
then
got
it's a
buy-in from me.
togetherness and
Absolutely.
it's strengthening and, rather than fighting.
Which creates greater intimacy as a couple because it's something we accomplish together. We determined a common goal, we took the necessary steps, and we've moved together to make this thing happen. That feels good, even though you had to sacrifice some things in the process. So yes, saving is important.
Okay.
And the final one is H. It's the word that most people would not think of when you're talking about money, particularly if you don't have a lot of it, and it's help someone else. When you don't have a lot, it is very easy to get caught up in what I wish I had, what I should have had, how come I don't, and we can get very negative about the experience. But when you help someone else, even if it's in little ways, there's something magical that happens from that because you feel like your money is doing more than you are doing with it by yourself. So I used to, with my kids, we used to call it the $5 millionaire. We used to go to McDonald's and we would pick randomly whose bill we were going to pay or add $5 to. And I would give it to my kids and I'd let them pick. And even though it was just $5, we would always enjoy the look in the person's face, particularly if we did it through the drive-thru, looking through the rearview mirror and seeing the person's expression when either their entire bill or a portion of their bill had been randomly paid for by a stranger. And my kids would be like, I feel like a millionaire, which turned into the $5 millionaire because they got to see how something small makes a big difference. So you didn't get $20, you didn't get $50 for your allowance. But you took $5 and you made it do something big, and it makes it feel like more. So when we help someone or help in some way with what it is that we work so hard for, it makes us feel different about what we have or what we don't.
I think that's true. And I think also, I mean, I remember when I was working for the United Way and a company that I used to work for, sometimes you would see that the people really with the lower salaries and the least to give were the most generous. And I think they know where it goes. They've used some of those programs. They understand how valuable and how important it is. And so if you teach your kids that, and if you remind yourself, it also is a thing that kind of reminds you how what you do have. You know, you think about helping someone else means I have a rich life. That's more important than maybe not the pair of shoes, but maybe something else or whatever it is. It helps realign your own values.
It's very true, and it's kind of like when people think about Oprah and they laugh about the fact that she could say a car for you and a car for you and a car for you. That they wish that they had the kind of money that they could do something like that. But if you think about what the feeling is that you want, the feeling is the ability to do something for someone. The feeling that comes from very genuine and generous behavior is very satiating. There's something so satisfying about that. And we may not all be able to randomly give a crowd a bunch of new cars, but we can do little things in little ways that make us feel like we're little millionaires. So it's true that doing something for others makes a huge difference. And the less you have, the more of a difference it actually makes you feel, which seems counterintuitive. But it is actually true.
What's a bigger proportion of what you have?
Absolutely. Oh, no question about it. Because $5 to someone who has 10 versus $5 to someone who has 100 is a very different proportion.
Right.
But for each person doing something for someone else, what is the same is the sense that what I make, what I've sacrificed for, matters. And it matters to more than just me. And it also takes the focus off of what you don't have.
Right. And that's that bigger discussion about money is you can get so insular and fighting about every little thing, and you become disconnected from the community and the world around you.
Absolutely.
As opposed to using it to reconnect.
That is so true. And there's so many things that we can use to do that. But we have to remember that we are a resource. There's so much we have individually that if we just connected it with someone else, the collective power is so much greater than any one individual power. But we have to see ourselves as part of the whole. And when we do those kinds of things, we get a chance to be part of something bigger than ourselves.
And that's good. That sounds
feels
great.
Good.
Okay.
It does.
Let's see if I've learned anything.
Okay. So we're going to seek.
Communicate.
Absolutely. A.
Ask.
Ask yourself the important questions. S.
Save.
Save indeed. We need to. And H.
Help.
Help others. You are an A student, Robin.
Yay! Thank you. I've learned so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. I hope you've learned something too. Begin to set aside that money meeting and have those conversations and make sure you're building on those shared values. Thank you.